Why the World is Shifting Towards Right-Wing Control. There was two great books written in the mid-2000s about rightward shifts. McGann and Christjelt's The Radical Right in Western Europe and Joseph Stiglitz's Globalization and Its Discontents. The former is a comparative analysis of radical politics, and the later is half whistleblower memoir, half political analysis of how the anti-globalization movement birthed or revitalized a wide representation of political ideologies, from American anarchism to Al-Qaeda. Both works have a different scope, but conclude a similar formula for where right-wing parties find success. A lack of effective left-wing alternative. Failure of mainstream parties to address economic concerns across class boundaries. Absence of political suppression of radical ideologies. Socioeconomic anxieties of a world becoming more globalized, as expressed as xenophobia, protectionism, chauvinism, etc. Even though these works are about 20 years old, I think their theses still hold true. Liberalism, neoliberal economics are struggling to deliver for many people as the world becomes more and more connected. So voters, politicians seek ideas outside of the liberal hegemony. I highly recommend both, but Joseph Stiglitz, on top of being one of the great economists of the late 20th century, is a really good writer. His current writings on American populism and the lack thereof economic resiliency in China are very interesting. I would add to the lack of left-wing alternatives. Many in the oligarchic and owner classes often find left-wing policies and political leaders more unfavorable than right-wing or even far-right policies and leaders. Punishing minorities and asylum seekers doesn't actively harm them as much as various left-wing policies might. And many in the working classes who desperately want change see that the only people advocating serious change are those on the right and not the liberal center. Even though that change is harmful, they might find it worth the risk, or buy into all the constant ridiculous propaganda about woke, politically correct radical left totalitarian mobs and neo-Marxists destroying the nation or West. And many in the majority population's demographic, ostensibly, have less to personally fear by all the anti-immigrant and anti-minority rhetoric, which is why scapegoating minority groups is always such an easy and common practice among political leaders, especially authoritarian charlatans and demagogues. Absence of political suppression of radical ideologies. That doesn't work anywhere except under authoritarian forms of government. Only social suppression of radical ideologies will work in a democratic society, and since the US is no longer socially cohesive, because we aren't all thumping the same Bible, or not thumping at all, hell, we don't even consume the same media/news since the advent of cable TV. We only unite when we are collectively attacked. See 9/11, then see 1/6. I'm struck more by the absence of real substance behind the right-wing leaders. In the past, especially considering the great models of authoritarian leaders, Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon, one might assume that the leaders would be former soldiers, or at least very active in serious revolutionary groups. Instead, it seems like they are lifelong politicians, failed businessmen or professors, or even simple celebrities who gain a flash of popularity and ride that to election victories. They often have financial support from oligarchs of some kind and from right-wing think tanks. Is it because they aren't actually serious people, so these backers in the shadows believe they can be more easily controlled for their own interests and ideologies? I don't think Napoleon is a good model. Alexander the Great, definitely not. I mean, we don't live in a time when people get on a horse and go conquering. Most European countries haven't seen war since WW2, and there are no underground revolutionary groups. Obviously, you're not going to have anyone with those qualifications running for office in countries that have been peaceful for most people's lifetimes. The left is failing to acknowledge and discuss ideologically difficult topics, handing over the entire discourse to the right. If all the left is going to do is chide voters for disagreeing with them, why would these voters respond by just agreeing? The overall tendency of profit to decline, aka capitalism just ain't capitalizing like it used to, is the reason that contradictions are intensifying in the imperial core. Small business owners and landlords, the petite bourgeoisie, cannot make enough money to make ends meet. Rather than blame the system, which would implicate them in the world's problems, they scapegoat minority groups and veer into mystical conspiracy theories. More racist segments of the labor aristocracy, tech brothers, anyone connected to investing or the military-industrial complex, are behaving in a similar manner for similar reasons. Source: The Next Recession. Lots of comments deleted. Those may have had your earnest answers from the source face with tears of joy.
I think a lot of comments will answer with left-wing perspectives on the right rather than provide any level of objectivity, or what might even be more valuable here, the right-wing perspective.
Immo: People in Europe are largely concerned with protecting their own people and their culture. Immigration has objectively created problems for Europe. But even beyond that, I think many people don't find a fully homogeneous global culture, the end result of complete globalization and mass immigration, to be desirable. I actually love to use left-wing literature to highlight why they feel this way, particularly decolonial literature. Decolonizing the Mind by Ngugi wa Thiong'o is about how the British systemically attempted to destroy African culture in their colonies. But I think a point it makes that's really critical is the importance of a people's own values, stories, common myths, etc. Decolonial literature is, at its core, nationalistic because it's about casting off invader nations, and can be very illuminating of how average right-wingers feel today.